are looking live at the Versailles restaurant in Little Havana from Miami, Florida, as Newsmax TV coverage of Battleground Florida continues live on this Saturday morning. And this final hour, as a recovering member of Congress, here's one promise I'm going to keep. We've got a very special guest joining us at the table, and that would be former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. Mike, it's good to have you here.
Thank you, JD. Great to be here. I just came for the Cuban coffee at Versailles. I've been here before. Most amazing thing in the world. But what an amazing time to be in Florida just before the primary that really may determine the entire rest of the Republican nomination process.
And completing the table here, Miranda Kahn to my left, screen right, and our good friend John Bachman. So that we're now all present and accounted for, here is a spontaneous and unrehearsed press conference of the air, to use the old line from Meet the Press. Governor, you're taking a look. Your name was on the ballot in this state in 2008.
Yep.
What do you think will happen on Friday or on Tuesday? Will Trump keep his lead, or can Rubio rally?
Well, let me just begin by saying I think that the best candidate is not really still in the race. You're sitting next to him.
Of course, that's true.
You know, but that's how you got to feel, or you don't run for president.
Exactly.
This has been the most amazing process. I still think that we're going to see Donald Trump win Florida. I don't see any reason to doubt that. Marco has had a good surge, and Marco's a friend. In fact, the last time I was in this restaurant, it was with Marco Rubio in 2008. A lot of people don't remember this or maybe never knew it, but Marco was my Florida co-chairman in 2008 when I ran for president. I love Marco. He's a great guy. He's brilliant. He's smart. I think Marco hurt himself when he tried to out-Trump Trump in the debate a couple of weeks ago. And it took away from Marco's brand. He himself, I thought, also made one of the most extraordinary moments that I think will do well for him in the long-term future. He admitted it was a mistake. He said he regretted it. It's very rare for a person at that level of politics to openly and publicly say, I messed up. And I thought, for me, his stock went way up because he had the humility to recognize that that's not who he is. And when I watched Marco take on Trump in that way, try to, again, out-Trump Trump, I said to myself, that's not who he is. And those were the very words that he then later came back to say. JD understands this. You've been in the arena, so have I. You have people surrounding you. They're telling you, you got to do this. Here's what you got to do. And you are so physically and emotionally and spiritually exhausted from the campaign that you let your guard down and you let yourself get influenced by consultants and donors, and the next thing you knew, you're doing something you wished you hadn't done. All of that to say, I don't think that's enough. And the momentum with Trump seems to be so strong. He dominates the news coverage in every news cycle, and I just don't see anyone stopping him.
Now, your daughter actually works for Trump's campaign.
She went to work for the Trump campaign. I've not endorsed anyone. I'm staying neutral in the primary. I will support our nominee. I'm not like some of the Republicans who say, well, if it's this guy, I won't support him. But let me be very clear. I like Donald Trump. I've been accused of being an endorser. I'm not. But I'm the first to tell you I like him. I know all these guys. I know every one of them. Not only as a competitor, most of them I have known either as a friend or a colleague. So, you know, I come at this from a little different perspective. I know them backstage, not just on stage. Donald Trump is a brilliant man. And when I hear Republicans tear their shirts, act like, oh my gosh, it'll be the end of the world as we know it, that's absurd. It may be the end of their world as they know it. And quite frankly, nothing would be better for this country than to have an utter disruption of the ruling class in Washington, which is the reason we have this uprising.
Yeah.
And that is one of the reasons I think Trump is doing so well.
Governor, you talk about an uprising, and if you look at the footage from Chicago last night, uprising might be a word that would apply to that situation. You talked about the importance of Florida and the issues here that are so important to Florida voters that also carry through to the nation as well. But we're talking about Chicago, and you mentioned how Trump dominates the news coverage.
Yep.
Where do you think the responsibility lies today with Donald Trump? What should he say to the American public? Should he say, I messed up, I didn't do enough to stop this type of thing? Should he talk to the Black Lives Matter activists? You're a pastor, you know how to bring people together and heal them. What is Donald Trump's responsibility today?
John, he would make a huge mistake if he pretended that this was his fault. Because it isn't his fault. It's the fault of protesters who, in a very organized fashion, Now we've seen the Facebook page. We know that MoveOn.org was behind a lot of this. This was not some spontaneous uprising of some disaffected young people who just thought, oh, we don't agree with him. It's another way, though, for Donald Trump, which I hope he will use it this way, to remind people that the answer to free speech is not to shut someone down. The answer to free speech is more speech. If you don't like Donald Trump, don't vote for him. If you don't like Donald Trump, don't go hear him in his speech. But don't keep other people from hearing, because what they did last night, those protesters, they shut down his speech, but they gave him the entire weekend news platform. I will assure you that this helps, not hurts, Donald Trump.
And yet, a campaign being a campaign, Mike, Kasich, Rubio, Cruz, all basically saying that Trump has at least some degree of culpability in the atmosphere last night in Chicago.
What else can they say? I mean, sure they're going to say that. I thought it was most fascinating. I watched a news conference with Cruz last night. And most ironic was, as we know, there's been a steady pattern of dirty tricks in the Cruz campaign. Everything from the Ben Carson debacle with the Iowa vote, the mailers that went out in Iowa, the Hawaii issues that happened, things that the Cruz campaign did to Rick Santorum and to me in Iowa. And every time, Cruz dismissed that as saying, well, I had nothing to do with that. Those were people, those were volunteers, those were people in the campaign. I had nothing to do with that. Last night, he's standing there with a straight face saying, it starts at the top. And I thought, well, that's a fascinating new turn of thought. Look, I don't know of anybody who is thinking about voting for Trump that blames Donald Trump for a bunch of rabble-rousers going to a university coliseum and fighting with cops. I just don't believe that's what's going to happen.
But he did say that he wanted to punch one of the protesters.
Yeah.
And not too long after that, somebody in fact did that.
Not the most temperate remark for a presidential candidate.
Right.
And I think that, you know, in the time in which he said it, he was not saying it in the context of 10,000 people being outside screaming and yelling. And in many ways, you go back, and if you look at Trump, this is part of who he is. It's part of the bravado. It's part of that whole shtick that he brings. And people say, he's just being a New Yorker. You know, he's just being who he is. Now, am I excusing that? No. I'm just saying that's not unusual. It's unfair, though, to say that because he said what a lot of people were thinking, which is why Donald Trump is leading, he's saying things that people are thinking, they just don't say it at the podium. But my point being that here is a guy who has said some very inflammatory, very intemperate things, and rather than it hurt him, it has actually propelled him, because that's how people feel. People are angry. I think, Miranda, we're seeing nothing less than the overthrow of our government. That's what we're seeing. It's a peaceful overthrow so far. We're going to do it by ballots, not bullets, thank God. But this is a revolution. If people are that upset with the ruling class, and frankly, they ought to be.
Newt Gingrich talked about it in 2012, but he called it the consultant class.
Yes.
You just relayed what we go through as candidates. And one thing that has happened with the Trump candidacy, the template that every conservative Republican confronted, where you would state something that would be true, but MoveOn.org and others would say, what do you mean? And then there would be this advice from consultants, oh, you need to retreat,
right,
or you need to apologize. Trump has taken that and stamped it out, it would appear.
JD, it's exactly right. He has been the Teddy Roosevelt who's charging up San Juan Hill, and there is no retreat. You know, he's William Travis at the Alamo. Win or lose, he's going to dig in, and he's not going to ever pull the troops back. And I think that there's a lot of Americans who are so glad that if Donald Trump is president, he's not going to give an apology tour to the rest of the world. He's not going to go around and say, we're so sorry, we didn't mean to offend you. Oh my gosh, let's have a beer summit. Let me sit down and weep and cry. No, he's going to say what he said. America needs to win again. And that is why he is rising.
Let me jump in real quick here, because on the podium, on the debate stage, you talked about the need to unify.
Right.
All right. You think Donald Trump is going to win Florida? That would effectively end the contest, right? The primary contest.
It would make it much, much harder for someone to grab the brass ring, for sure.
So let's fast forward to Wednesday. Donald Trump has won Florida. What does he say then to start unifying the party?
I think we already are seeing the sort of the transformational Donald Trump from a candidate who is taking out his opponents He's done it brilliantly. I mean, I'm sitting here instead of being on the campaign trail because
Right.
he was able to successfully surgically remove virtually everyone around him. And I salute him for that just as a fellow warrior. But what I think you saw in the last debate, which was pretty remarkable.
Very civil, too.
That's right, very civil, and he is transitioning from that warrior who's having to take out his opponents to the guy who is rallying, saying, we've got to win the party, we have to win the country, and I think that's what we're going to see more of Wednesday as well.
So you see him moving more towards the center. I want to go back to something you said. You were remarking about how intelligent Mr. Trump is. Dr. Carson has said there's two different Donald Trumps. Do you agree with that? Are there two different sides of the Donald?
Yeah,
Well, only a minute remains.
Oh,
So
okay. I'll make this quick. Yeah, there's a sense in which there is the bravado, blustery Donald Trump who does that because that's his brand, that's what he has to do to win. There's also the serious, thoughtful, policy Donald Trump that a lot of people haven't seen, but I assure you there is more than just the podium presence.
And we assure you at home there is more of Mike Huckabee here at our table as we continue Battleground Florida, Newsmax TV's live coverage this Saturday morning of what may happen on Tuesday. We are live at the Versailles restaurant in Little Havana in Miami, Florida. It's interesting to talk about the dynamics of this campaign because, my goodness, I think it was back in showbiz, Tom Hanks talked about Jackie Gleason coming in to do the first reading for the toy. Gentlemen, let's begin. He sucked all the air out of the room. Maybe that's what Donald Trump has done to this presidential campaign. At any rate, more to discuss.